Okay, good evening, folks. Sorry, I was just messing around and trying to get the transcription to stop because it's just going to be a heck of a lot of data. Welcome from a sweltering Cape Town. It's very hot down here tonight, so my apologies if there's a bit of a swish in the background. That would be the fan and the aircon running. Otherwise, I don't think I'd make it through the time we're going to spend together. Tonight we're going to deal with Unit 3, Chapter 6 of Entrepreneurship 3A. I'm going to give in a moment before I start. I will give it a similar opportunity at the end, but I want to give a moment before we start to find out if there are any questions. I know some of you are busy with the assignment. If there are any questions around the assignment, if anybody wants to ask anything before we start, because I know some of you have got very busy schedules. So I'm going to give an opportunity now. If there's anybody, please ask me now about the assignment, and then I'll give another opportunity at the end of this for the assignment. Thanks, Kevin. I see you say that's fine with the assignment so far. I am waiting for one bit of information. I promised I would do an assignment brief. I saw an email come through earlier, which is the piece of information I've been waiting for. So I haven't made the assignment brief recording yet, but it seems I haven't opened the email. I just saw it coming past. And if that is what the information I believe that I need, I will probably make that recording tomorrow morning. And I will then upload that recording at the same time that I release this recording of the class. I will upload the brief of the assignment. Please, even if you've done the assignment, please just give my briefing a listen, just to make sure you're on the right track. This assignment is different from anything else that you've done before. If you're listening to this recording and say, the assignment is still 2 weeks away, 3 weeks away, I'll look at it the weekend beforehand. Please do us all a favor and look at the assignment sooner rather than later. Because I think you might just do yourself in if you don't look at it now. It's not something that you want to try doing over in a day or two, because you need to give it a bit of thought. It's not just a regurgitation. It's a typical third year type of assignment. Thank you, Kamogelo. I see you so far happy. I think you'll find quite a lot of value in the assignment, and part of that assignment comes out of this specific unit where we're looking at developing your customers. And there's your learning outcomes. As always, it's a good thing to look at those and to understand what it is that we want to take out of this section of the work, what Learning Unit 3 is about. It's good that before you tackle the learning unit, you have a look at that, and then very important that right at the end of the learning unit, you come back to this and say, okay, can I define, describe, illustrate, and discuss those issues that the outcomes require from me? Because at the end of the day, this is not about passing an exam. This is about gaining knowledge and being able to know and understand. I am going to apologize right now because I'm going to be drinking a lot of water. Because as I said, it is rather warm. And I saw somebody also said Port Elizabeth is just as bad. It's strange. The poor guys up in KZN were being washed away a week ago, and we suffering here from the heat. Luckily, rain hopefully from tomorrow for a day or two. Okay. Yeah, Pretoria, a bit chilly and rainy too. Yeah, you see, we don't know what chilly is, and rain we've not seen for probably 2-3 months down here where I am in the Western Cape, up the West Coast. It's really dry. I've got 20,000 litres, 30,000 litres worth of tanks. I've not had water in them since, I think it was late January. So yeah, quite hectic. Okay, so we're going to look at the customers and the markets. The whole idea of tonight is developing your customer base to see how as an entrepreneur, you've got to do something with your product. So you've got to find customers. And so the focus of this is on the customer. And this is a bigger than this chapter. Just this chapter. There used to be a time period where people focused on the product, and they didn't worry so much about the customer. And let me state now, for entrepreneurs, that's still very much the case. That you focus on the product and then find a customer for your product. But in the bigger business world, you need to make sure that you satisfy that customer, that the customer is happy, and that they are satisfied with the product, and that your product addresses a need that customer has. And entrepreneurs don't normally have a lot of resources to them, but this is a method that entrepreneurs can do. If you can't survive without your customer. After all, that is the key place where you're making money from. You might have other things that somehow generating a little bit of money here and there, but at the end of the day, without a customer base and a customer base that is generating enough funds, your business cannot be successful. You can have flashes where you do well in a month or two, but without a strong customer base, you will not be able to survive in the long run. So you need a customer base that is able to sustain your business over the long period of time. And just as a bit of a definition clarification, customer versus consumer, it's not the same thing. So the person you're interested in is the customer. The person who consumes the product may be somebody else. Let me use a simple example. I have a newspaper delivered at my house. I pay a monthly fee for that. I am the customer. I don't even think there are still many newspapers around, but it serves well as an example. I am the customer. I pay for that. I also consume that paper. I read the paper. But when I'm finished with my paper at 10 o'clock in the morning, I take my cup of coffee, I walk over to my neighbor, and we have a bit of a chat, and I say, yeah, neighbor, if you want to read the paper, there's the paper. That neighbor is not a customer. You're not making money out of my neighbor, but they are a consumer of your product. So that's one way where you have the customer and the consumer as two different people. I'm going to use another, possibly a more contentious example. And I'm specifically referring to students in an on-campus environment. Students, there's a different demographic between students in the online environment and the students on the on-campus environment. I'm now speaking specifically about most of the students in the on-campus environment. The students on the on-campus environment are consumers. They come to my class, I teach them, they consume the material I share with them. The customer is the parent. The parent is paying me my money. In the online environment, the customer and the consumer is in many cases one and the same person. That's why I'm not using that as an example, because many of our online students are working adults and they pay for themselves. But in the on-campus environment, typically the students' parents pay for them. So the parent is the customer. That's the person who's paying the account. The student is the consumer. So make sure that you understand that difference, because we do use those interchangeably in language. But be careful when you make the customer and the consumer the same person if you're writing an assignment or in some kind of assessed work, because there is a significant difference between the two, and you need to understand that. So you'll remember from first year, we spoke about the micro, the market, and the macro environment. Now, this is this is not an environment, but we talk about the market as the place where people can sell goods, if it's or services that they can supply a service to people, they can do things for people. And we have people that wish to buy those goods and services, and that is called the demand. Now, there's four elements, and I'm just going to read the sentence. A set of customers for products or services who have needs or wants and who reference each other when making a buying decision. That is the elements that define a market, a set of customers for products or services which have needs or wants and who reference each other when buying those decisions. So let's just talk about that for a moment, right? So we have a customer. We have somebody that has money in their pocket and that's prepared to pull the money out and hand it over to you, right? We have a product or a service. There is something that they want that they are prepared to exchange the money for. So they have, there's something. And they want that. That's why they're prepared to give it, or they need it, right? So remember, needs are things that we must have to survive. Wants are those luxury items as a rule that we don't need, but that we want, right? So we need food, but we want chocolate cake. And then the important part, and this is probably where a lot of companies get hurt, is that the customers reference each other. Anybody want to guess what that means? What does customers referencing each other mean? Feel free to open your mic and speak. Feel free to type. Anyone works for me. Just have a stab at it. What does it mean, referencing each other?
Evening, sir. Kamohelo here.
Yeah.
Would referencing each other mean sort of interacting?
Yes, it's part of it. It's definitely part of interacting.
Okay.
I see Kevin says customers may buy things that they see others buy. It goes further than discussing or speaking to each other. It goes further than seeing. It is the actual act of encouraging each other to buy or discouraging others. Remember, we're talking about who reference each other when they make a buying decision. A buying decision can be positive or negative. So the buying decision might be, I'm not buying that. And referencing each other means we listen to each other, we speak to each other. I say to you, you know what? I've bought that car. I will never buy that car again. It's given me so many hassles, so many problems. I don't want a car like that again. The next person might say, do you know what? I bought this car. It is a brilliant car. And when you go to have it serviced, the service is amazing. And we might be speaking about exactly the same model and make of car bought from exactly the same place. The customer experience might differ. But the customers reference each other. And referencing can take place directly, you speaking to your friends, but referencing also in the modern world takes place through channels like Hello Peter, through complaints on Facebook. I regularly, I stay quite far out of Cape Town, so I travel down and I sleep over occasionally and so on. And when I make a booking for a place to sleep over on booking.com, I always read what previous people have said. Right? I'm referencing the other customers. So, and that is actually about the whole elements that define a market. Yes, you need a customer. Yeah, there must be a product. Yes, there must be a need for that product, right? But the referencing part is the part that keeps your market together. Because if the referencing goes against you, you're going to have problems. People are going to, your product is going to get a bad name. And you're going to have a problem. On the other side, if the referencing goes your way, you're smiling all the way to the bank. Okay, a market opportunity. What is a market opportunity? It's the degree that a customer or the market wants that product. So how much demand is there for that product? And when we have a demand, right, it creates an opportunity for us. And then we talk about a product application, right? So you apply your product to that opportunity, to that market demand. So you've got to match those two things, right? To be able to, if you think back in the definition of the market, there needs to be a need, right? And you have a product that satisfies that need. So we're focusing on that little bit, and we apply our product to the need. And I like this terminology, because this terminology tells me when you apply something, it needs to fit. Right? If you've got a scratch and you apply a plaster to it, if it's a small scratch, you're not going to use a big plaster. If it's a big scratch, you can't use a small plaster. You must have the appropriate size. It needs to be right for the application. And this is what we're talking about here. So you must apply the good or service so that it meets the opportunity or the demand in the market. And how do we know if we need that if our application fits, if the two things are gelling? Market research. So we're going out and we're speaking to people and we're saying, what do you want? What do you know? What is it that actually is the real thing that you want? And through doing market research, we can determine whether our application is going to fit, right? And part of our market research is going to be, what are the customers? Now, I spoke earlier about the customer versus the consumer. And we talk, now we're going a bit deeper into this. We talk about a chain of customers, right? And that chain of customers that we have could be the purchaser, the user, or the influencer, right? That word influencer, it's that word that you think it is. That is where that word comes from. Right? The word influencer, those guys sitting on TikTok telling you to buy whatever, is actually a legitimate business term. It's not just a term that somebody grabbed out of the air. So the purchaser is the person that bought the product, right? The user is the consumer, right? And then the influencer is the person that is getting you to buy the product. They don't necessarily purchase it. They don't necessarily consume it, but they get you to buy it. So if you think about it, you might be all three. You might purchase the product, right? You may consume it, and you may tell other people to buy it. So then you are the full chain of customers. But in many cases, we have three separate things that have a influence on it. So if you think about a kid buying a little dinky toy, a young boy that wants a toy, a car to play in the sand with. I wonder if they still do that, but yes, in our day we used to play in the sand with cars. So the purchaser would be the parents, right? The user would be the little boy. The influencer may be another child. He saw somebody else playing with that toy. The influencer might be Batman, James Bond, where he saw the car being used in a movie, and this is a scale model of that car. That might be the influencer. The influencer might be a family member who told him, geez, you see this big red Corvette standing outside here. Did you know you can buy your own little Corvette? Go ask your mommy. They've got one in the toy shop, right? So the influencer can come from various places. But as I say, these can be three entities or one entity or a combination of difference. The user in many cases is an influencer themselves, influencing other people to make the purchasing decision. But when we look at influencers, we have different types of influencers, right? We have the user, as I just explained. They can actually get other people to buy it. We have influencers, the real influencers, the one you're thinking about. We also call them opinion leaders. They are, in many cases, not customers, celebrities, journalists, on more sophisticated products, industry analysts. I invest in the share market. I read quite a bit about what people say about the share market, who says buy what. And then I'll say, that's interesting. Purple Group seems to be at a very low point now, or Renogen has recently delivered their first hydrogen, so maybe that's a good buy. But I'm getting fed information through people, that industry analysts and so on, bloggers, social media people, car reviewers. Definitely, thank you, Kamogelo. Car reviewers are big influencers. And that's why the car companies are more than happy to hand over a set of keys to somebody that writes reviews on cars and say, take the car, drive it. I mean, there's guys that do long-term reviews where they drive a car for a month or 2 months before they do a review. It's not just that they're jumping in the car and driving around the block with it. That costs, just think about this. You're taking a brand new car, you're handing the set of keys to somebody, and you're telling them to drive the car for a month. Think about the value depreciation in that. But it is such a, 6 months with a Porsche. Yeah, can you imagine? What a dream. I'm putting my hand up. If you know people, just, send them my way. Happy to do that. No problem. It's just going to be a big Porsche. I'm a rather large unit. But the fact of the matter is, that's a heck of a depreciation on that product. It's a lot of money. But they're prepared to do that because they know the value. They know the amount of money the influencer can bring to them. If the influencer is positive, and we're going to get to that now, or just now, recommenders are people that are not influencing, but they do carry a lot of weight, and they tell the public about it, but they're not saying buy it. They're telling the public about it. Another important type of influencer is economic buyers. These are the big guys. These are the guys that are buying hundreds of thousands of units to put into retail chains, or they run a hotel. Just think about this. If you manufacturing bedding, I'm talking about sheets, pillowcases, these type of things. If you can get somebody who runs a hotel, or better, a chain of hotels, to say, we'll buy from you, what a great economic buyer for you. What a great influencer. Decision makers are similar to economic buyers, but they are higher up. So the economic buyer is the guy that physically going to walk into your shop. The decision maker is the guy in head office of the hotel chain that says, well, I've evaluated these 5 products. That's the product we're buying. But then there's another one, the so-called saboteurs. And we can't ignore them, right? So they're not one of the 5 influencers, but they sit on the side. And they are people that can say no. So, for example, a decision maker could be a saboteur. Your economic buyer can say, listen here, I think this is the product we want. But the decision maker could say no, and they veto the buy, and they become a saboteur. Therefore, you want to be careful, and you want to look at how do you handle the saboteur. In Kamogelo's example of the Porsche and the cars and so on, it could be the spouse. That could be your saboteur. That could be the person that says, no, you know what? Nuh-uh. I laughed so much. We went to a big furniture store in the Western Cape. We needed a new fridge. And we walked in, and the salesman started pitching to me. I just said, how's it? We need a new fridge. And I looked at him and I said to him, you're making a mistake. And the guy said, but sir, this is really a good fridge. This is blah, 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 blah. I said, no, listen to me. You're making a mistake. See that woman over there? That's my wife. I suggest you go speak to her. He said, sir? I said, yes. I suggest you go speak to her. And he had this funny expression. And off he trundled to my wife. And she said to him, no, I don't want that. I want this. And when we got to the front and we had to pay, true, Kevin, happy wife, happy life. When we got to the till, I said to him, you see, I'm just carrying the wallet. That's all I'm doing. She's the one making the buying decision, not me. And I've seen that in many cases where, especially in direct sales, but you see it in different cases, but in direct sales, you must understand who's going to be the saboteur here. If a car salesman sells a car and there's a couple there, he better sell that car as much to the wife as he sells it to the husband, because they both can be saboteurs. because it's a big decision, and in most households, both spouses are going to have, if they're both sitting in front of you, you need to sell to both of them. Ignore a spouse at your peril. Okay, so now we need to look at a bit of the segmentation, the actual part of how this works. So we have customers, and we group them together, right? We say, what are the common needs, the common behaviors of this? And this is an important building block in the whole business model, and in the books talk specifically to the business model canvas as well. And you need to be able to group your customers according to their needs, according to the different things that puts them together. Now, it's one thing to say how we put people together. It's another thing how we segment. And segmenting is more about grouping and dividing groups than it is to just form one big group. Because remember, if you only have one segment, you only have one market. But if you can create different segments, you have different markets. So you can sell your product into different markets. And the more markets you have, the more customers you have, and the more customers you have, the more money you make, obviously. So the first thing is you must know these people want my product. Once you know that, now we can start drawing separation lines. So how is it going to be distributed? Is it, for example, somebody that's going to come into a store and buy it? Or do you also have a customer that'll buy it online? And in South Africa, with Amazon coming in, with the other online buying places we have, many people have already just said, look, I'm segmenting immediately. I've got the people that walk into my store and they buy a product, but I've got the people that come online and they buy it through the online. There's immediately two segments for me. There's different types of relationships. Some people want to buy the product and leave. Other people want to buy a product, and the product is the start of a relationship with your organization. So they want a backup service. They want to just think of people that buy second-hand motor cars versus people that buy new motor cars. If you buy a new motor car, you don't just want to buy a car. You want a whole service plan, you want backup, you want roadside assistance, and all of these type of things. Second-hand motor car, I just want the car cheap and I want to leave. I'll sort out my services, my insurance will give me my roadside assistance, and so on. And then profitabilities. Is it possible to have a market where you're using the same or very similar product, and one is a top-notch, very high profitability, and the other one is low profitabilities? And the profitability might not lie on the product. It might lie in the marketing. It might lie in the service. It might lie in many other things that you have to do to actually sell the product. And that might be your segmentation. And then the aspects of the offer. So the product that you're offering and the complete offering and all the elements of the offer, people are willing to pay for different aspects of the offer. Where I stay in a little community way out of town. I pay a lot more than people 10Ks that way for internet. And the aspect that I'm paying for is delivery of the signal, right? Where we are, there's no fiber. Fiber doesn't stretch this far. It stops 10Ks away. So I'm paying for somebody to beam a signal into my house via satellite. Well, satellites, terrestrial satellites. And I'm willing to pay for that aspect, right? I'm willing to pay a heck of a lot. The rest of it I'm not interested in. As long as I get a constant signal at an average speed, that's what I'm happy for. I don't want any of the other services they offer. I'm not really interested. That's the one aspect I need. So in terms of segmentation, we've got to ask a couple of questions. Who are the customers? And there we look at demographics. What's the age? What's the gender? What's the race? What's the education? What's the income? Those things are important things because different things work for different people. And I mentioned the race word, and people are very scared to talk about that, but I rather think that's interesting, how we try to be an homogenous society in South Africa, but there's still a big racial difference in marketing things, because there's a cultural difference. And there's a classic example, and it'd be interesting how true this still holds, of a couple of years ago, of 5 Roses. In the advert, they had the guy handing over a bunch of roses to a lady and saying, these roses are for you, or these 5 roses are for you, as an advertisement for 5 Roses tea. And they launched this on television. And in their demographics, they immediately saw a decline in the Black African market. And they couldn't understand that. And when they went to the market and did further market research, which you always have to do, they found that the general consensus in the market was there was a bit of an aversion for it, because roses and flowers you give at a funeral, and it's not a gift. I don't know how true that holds today, and it's also generational. I think if you in your 20s or so, you would quite easily maybe give your girlfriend some roses, but if you're in your 40s or your 50s, it might not be such a nice thing to do culturally. And then you've got to ask yourself, who are the people that drink tea? And they then change that advert, right, to have a different, because in South Africa also, you've got to think about, are you going to have different adverts, especially if you're spending money on television adverts? Are you going to have different adverts for different demographies, or for different segments? Or how are you handling your advertisements? Or must you try to have a shotgun advertisement that you hope will cover all my demographics, all my segments in the same time? Then where are they? Where are your customers located geographically? Because for most products, you want to be as close as possible to your customers. So you want to be at your customer base, and your customers you don't want to be far away. We have got up here on the West Coast, and I'll call out some towns, and some of you may have heard of them, some of you may not have heard. In towns like Malmesbury, Langebaan, Veldrif, and I'm trying to think what other places. There is a chain of stores that still sell high-end household goods. You know, the washing machines, the dishwashers, and so on. Because we are 150 to 200 kilometers from Cape Town, and you need to travel to Cape Town to buy those things. And these guys had a very smart idea. They said, listen here, hang on. It's not that difficult. There's a significant market there. People travel to Cape Town. Then they've got to pay a lot of money to have the product delivered. And if something goes wrong, then there's a call-out fee, and that's significant because it's far. Why don't we establish these stores? And these guys are very clever. They've got one big warehouse in Cape Town, and they carry very, very little stock. And the warehouse, by the way, is associated with a different named chain of their own, right? So there's the segmentation. That warehouse, on a daily basis, a truck leaves that warehouse and it drives to Malmesbury, and from Malmesbury it goes up to Veldrif, and then down to Langebaan, and then back down the West Coast Road, back to the warehouse. And they just do deliveries, right? So you walk into the store, they've got all these beautiful stuff. You've not driven 200 kilometers, right? You're driving up the road into the town that you stay, or the neighboring town, and they've got a lovely store with all these things. And you say, I want this fridge. When can you deliver it? Sir, I'll have to check the delivery schedule, but I think the day after tomorrow. Boom, I'm happy. Day after tomorrow, they deliver it. They don't charge me an exorbitant fee. They charge me the normal from their store delivery fee. But that stuff all's coming from Cape Town. They only have the demo stuff on the floor. Why? Because they know where their customers are, and in geographic terms, they have located themselves close to the customer. It creates a lot of things, but amongst others, creates the illusion that I'm supporting a local company. I'm keeping the money in my community, but also it's a convenience because they're close to me, right? And these guys have used the whole geographic thing and the whole where are my customers as their key segmentation. And that's how they come in close to us. How does the customer behave? What are the lifestyle habits? What are the behavioral things that they do? And how can we use that as segmentation? Are these people that go out partying every weekend, or the people that stay at home? Are these people that go away every holiday, or do they not go out on holiday? Are they regular users of restaurants? How do they consume information? Are they using their cell phones? Do they watch television? How do they do that? And then obviously the needs are another thing. You need to understand your customer needs and align your product offering with what your customers need. So there's the end user profile. Guys, I don't know, it was something funny happened on my side. I'm not sure if there was a dip or what happened, but I was out and I'm back in. I'm assuming that means that this will be part 2 of the recording. Apologies for that. So there are the 6 main things that you look at: the demographics, the psychographics, the proxy products, the watering holes, and so on. So I'm just going to quickly mention a couple of those things. Demographics we've spoken about. Psychographics is the psychological attitudes or attributes, sorry, the attitudes, the values, the fears that these people have. It's different to demographics in the sense that demographics are physical. These are more mental or psychological. Are there proxy products? If your product doesn't work, is there something else that they're going to buy? I go to the shop to buy my wife earrings for a birthday. I don't find earrings, I buy her expensive perfume. It's a proxy product. It's something that replaces it. Watering holes is simply what it sounds like. Where do users meet? Where do they meet? Where do they swap information? And how can you use that place, that geographical location, or today more and more that online place, to exploit and to promote your product? A good way of this is the day in the life exercise. Walk a day in the life in your customer's shoes and understand what that means, and then understand fears and motivations. What are they scared about if they're buying the type of product that you have? So if we think about the example I was giving about the people that have moved their store closer to the household goods store closer to the customers, they've addressed a big fear. What if this thing breaks? I've traveled 200 kilometers all the way down to Cape Town. They deliver the product, and 2 days later it breaks. How am I going to get service? Will they even come out? How long is it going to take? My wife's dishwasher is broken. I'm in trouble. Am I going to get service? The likelihood of getting service, the illusion that it creates, it's a place just up the road here. They will come out and come service it. So they're addressing a fear there quite easily. Then there's something called the customer journey mapping process. Now, this is a very big word for simply saying it's a visual representation of the customer experience. So you try to, and there's a number of ways, and we'll look at a couple of the ways. So it shows how the customer experiences your product and all the touch points that they have with your product. So, and part of what that does, so it's literally drawing a picture in any which format you like, or a diagram in any which format you like, of all the ways the customer interacts with you. So the customer is going to see an advert in the newspaper, or they're going to hear an advert on the radio, or for your product, it's more likely that one of the influencers are going to inform them. What influence is it going to be, right? Then they're going to take action. They're going to go to the shop. So you draw that in. They come to the shop. What's going to happen in the shop? Well, firstly, they're going to interact with a salesperson in the shop. They may test drive if it's a car. If it's a restaurant, they may sit down and decide what they're ordering from a menu. If it's a household goods store, they're going to see different products. They might see a demonstration. For instance, very easy to demonstrate if they want a vacuum cleaner, different models of vacuum cleaner. Throw some chips on the floor, step on it, run over it with the one vacuum cleaner, run over it with the other vacuum cleaner, show them how much it has sucked up. That's another interaction point. Put it in your customer journey map. Then they're going to go to the pay point. What happens at the pay point? Does the pay point come to them, or do they have to go to the pay point? What happens after sales? We're going to deliver the product to the house. Who are they dealing with? Are they dealing on the delivery? Is the gruff driver that's going to be rude and spoil the whole sales experience? Or is it a very friendly guy and an assistant who's going to help them to unbox this fridge, carry it in, carry the old fridge out? If they want the old fridge removed, they'll remove the old fridge for them. They're going to help with the unboxing. They're going to help with the situation in the situating it in the room. They're going to help switch it on. They're going to show them the basic features of the product. Is that the part of the customer journey, or what's going to happen? And what I'm now starting to refer to, if I make the distinction between a very gruff and rude driver that says, yeah, well, I just offload it, I'll just leave it here in the driveway, or the guy that says, yes, I'll take it into the house, I'll help you unpack it, is something we call pain points. Because you also want to know, what are the pain points? What are the places where your customer can have issues with, and how you're going to resolve those? And that you can do very well if you are busy showing them this customer journey mapping, because you will then easily be able to see the gap, that gap between desired customer experience and actual customer experience that you're offering at the moment. Because once you know that, then you can start addressing the gap. You can't address what you don't know. And this allows you to see, and without this, it's very easy that there's a rude driver, that you don't even think about the driver. I mean, the sale's been made, but let's remember something. The driver is not this sale. The driver is driving the next sale. The driver who is really friendly with the customer and helps them to doesn't help them. They carries the fridge in, helps with the unboxing, shows the features, leaves. It's the last contact point, but it leaves that positive thought. That customer is an influencer. That customer will tell their friends. That customer is a future customer. And you need to make sure that you actually lock that in, right? Through doing the customer journey process, our customer mapping process properly. I want to get to these 6 steps. It's simple. A whiteboard, sticky notes, markers, identify which one of your segments you're going to map, and then write down all those touch points. When you've done that, look at 3 or 4 key points within the customer journey map. Those pain points, those things, all things that are vitally important, key moments in that journey, and think, what are the problems there and how do you resolve those problems? And then create the full visual journey. So it's not rocket science, guys, but it's something that you really can use to visualize the drive. Now, this customer journey mapping is going to come up somewhere in an assessment. I can't remember if it's this semester or next semester, but you're going to get this story somewhere, and you need to be able to do it, and you need to write up a little story about it. Okay, these key phases. This is what I was talking about when I said the typical thing, that typical journey, the discovery, when you see the advert or you hear the advert or somebody tells you about it, when you think about the purchase, what is it that you want to purchase, when you actually go do the purchasing, the delivery and the after sales services. Those are, I almost want to say, chapters, right, in this customer journey mapping process. But within discovery, within research, purchase, delivery, after sales service, there can be many different aspects depending on the product, depending on the product or the service, and the type of product or the type of service, that will show you how this is unpacked. So see these as chapters, and then there's sub things that happen in each one of those chapters that have an influence on how you're going to unpack this. So there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind when you unpack those chapters. What are the key touch points? How do you interact with the customer? What is it that your customer wants? What the task that your customer is doing? What do they want to achieve? Is there knowledge? Is there something your customer wants to find out, that they want to know about the product? That's a key thing. For example, in South Africa now, if somebody walks in and they buy a fridge, they want to know what the power consumption of that fridge is going to be. Electricity is expensive, and lots of times we don't have electricity. So how much power does that fridge consume? And if the electricity goes off, how long will it stay cold before my goods start spoiling? And then pain points. You need to know where, when, and how will you disappoint your customer? What are the things that you know we are doing wrong? And how do we convert pain points into happy points? Those things that the customer immediately feels satisfaction about it. Are there any emotions involved? Is it an emotional process? Right? Is it a grudge purchase? Grudge purchase is things like insurance. It's things that we don't want to. I don't want to spend money on insurance, but I do feel it's important to spend the money. So you've got to coat it with something sweet for me. So what you do with my insurance, you tell me, you know what, sir, I know you don't want to pay this money, but don't claim for 18 months and I'll give you some of your money back. They're just sugarcoating a grudge purchase. What are the wish lists? What are the things they would really like to see? And who are those influencers? Who are the people that are going to make them buy or not buy the product? Lastly, market sizing. How do we size our market? So firstly, you need to estimate the potential customers. So the whole object of this exercise, we want to say, you're not going to know what the size of the market is, but we need to find a way of estimating that. So investors also want to see the size of that market. They want to know that how big is the market and what's your potential to penetrate that market. So here we look at things like the TAM, the SAM, and the SOM. Okay. So the TAM is your total available market. What is the total market that you could possibly reach? And this is everybody in a geographic area or everybody that could possibly want this product. Then your SAM is that part of the TAM that you're targeting. In other words, that's your target market or the service available market. And then finally, you have the SOM. It's a portion of that part that your company realistically is likely to reach. So the total available market is everybody. The serviceable available market, or the SAM, are those people that you're going to target, that you're going to think these are possible. And then the SOM is those that you're likely to reach, right? So you need to establish a launch market to test this, right? So if you have a launch market, you could test your TAM, SAM, and SOM. So a launch market is something that's similar to something else that we call a beachhead. And I've skipped a section. You know full well that we don't do everything. There's a thing about beachhead markets. But this is a strategy where you're selecting a place to launch your product into a group of customers. And this allows you to show that there are a group of customers that are really want to buy your product. This might be a niche base. These are investors, so that you can have, and if you've got niche customers that are interested in your product, you can already show investors, look, at these guys are already interested. We're going to take this niche base and we're going to move it out into the bigger part of the market. The key questions you want to ask when we're looking at customer segments is, what is the size? What are the buying powers? Who are the customers in the segments, right? And and that whole story about customers and segments, can you identify them? Because if you can't identify them, they don't exist. How accessible are they? So how are you going to get to them? And how stable is that? Is that something that is your market stable? Are those people, or are you churning through people all the time and new people are entering, old people are leaving? How do you manage that? Then the why is the sizing so important? Because it's going to affect your profits. As simple as that. You want to be able to calculate the sales and the profits you're going to make from that, because that's part of your risk. Remember, an entrepreneur takes a calculated risk, but you want to be able to establish the risk. And how do you establish the risk if you don't know the size of the market? And then from that, you can deduct your sales and your profits. It also shows you where you can possibly bring out different product lines or find new customer segments. That is a growth opportunity. We're always looking at competitors and how we can develop strategies to neutralize those competitors. And we can then, within the market sizing, we can see where's the market growth, where's the market shrinkage, because competitors are going to get in there, right? It also allows us to start thinking, how are we going to get out? Are we going to exit through selling the company, or are we going to have a pivot point where we're going to be selling a product, and at some point we're going to pivot away and we're going to do something different and change the way in which we look at our market? And then where's the market going? Where's the market, the direction the market's moving in, and what does that mean for us in 5 years, 10 years from now? And depending on the industry, because it might be quicker, it might take longer. And all of this you can put on the table and say to your investors, guys, this is what I'm bringing to the table. This is what it looks like. So how do we do this? Basically, define the segment, look at a top-down strategy of analyzing it. So we do the TAM, SOM, SAM thing, right? And so that we can eventually say, what's the whole market? What am I looking at, and what can I realistically reach? You can also do, right, a bottom-up analysis, right, which involves estimating the potential sales by just doing calculations and then arriving at a overall figure. It's a less logical thing because it's more of a thumb suck, right? And guys, whatever you do, you've got to sit back and say, am I overestimating my market? Am I being realistic, right? If you're saying to yourself, well, there's 60 million people in South Africa and I'm going to reach 40 million of them, right? You seriously need to look at the stuff you're smoking, because that's not going to happen, right? You're probably going to end up, if there's 60 million people and you're doing very, very well, you're reaching 500,000 people, right? So be realistic. And 500,000 out of 60 million, you're really, really doing well. You're a top-notch performer. Let's look 5,000. Then we're being realistic. We've got to do those sanity checks. We've got to be sure that we understand what we're talking about. And sanity check is internal, but sanity check is external as well. Check your competition. What are they doing? If there's a heck of a lot of people in this industry and in your geographic area, you're realistically going to sell to more people. Right? If you blind spotted and you're not looking at what your competition is doing and who your competitors are, they're going to blindside you. You're going to think, okay, this is this market, great stuff, guys. I've calculated out, I've done my sanity check. Realistically speaking, I've listened to what Carl said, 5,000 people. There's 10 competitors, right? So you're actually only reaching 500. Is it still worth your while? Is there actually a market segment? Is there actually money to be made? How does your product look compared to your competitor? Is your product 10 years old and you're trying to sell it as a top-notch product? Or Is your competitor selling a top-notch product? You say, you know what? Some people don't need all that technology. I will sell the 10-year-old product at half the price. Now you've done a sanity check. Now you know what your competitor is doing, and now you're knowing which segment of the market. I'm going into the lower end of the market. I'm going into the cheaper end of the market. I've done my segmentation correct. Guys, that's me for the evening. Are there any questions? Anything you want to ask? Anything you want to say? Any comments that you want to make? Happy to take that. Happy to field questions. Thanks, Kevin. Any questions, guys? Going, gone? Okay, look out for the recording. I'll release this recording tomorrow. Thanks you, Kamogelo. I will release the recording tomorrow, and then I'll also, thanks, Kirsten. I'll also then tomorrow do that. I just need to check that email, and then I'll do the brief for the assignment. All the best. As always, you've got my email. If there's any questions, anything you need to know, drop me an email, ask me your questions. I'm always there to assist. All the best, guys. Have a good evening. Cheers.